I want to welcome one and all here to the services, Church of Christ here in Santa Paula, and all of those of you who are on Zoom for joining us this beautiful Sunday morning. We're blessed with Robert Perez giving us a sermon, Dine with Jesus. And this is from John chapter 12, verses 1 to 11. Bob.
Well, hi, you guys. Everybody doing okay? Yeah. Thank you for the Lord's Supper and comments, Ramon, and thank you for all being here in your presence, and I pray that you're blessed. Those of you that are online too. So, John chapter 12. It was coming near the end, the very end for Jesus. To go to Jerusalem, or to come to Jerusalem for the Passover, was an act of the highest courage for him to have. He was already considered an outlaw. You can read that in 11 verse 8. The disciples warned him, if you go to Jerusalem, they were trying to arrest you. But then Thomas says in verse 16, well, let us go anyways because we will die with you there. And he heals Lazarus. And what do the people do? They go and tattletale on Jesus to the Pharisees, and they plot to arrest and to kill Jesus, but not during the Passover. And Jesus knew all this. So, as I said, it was coming near the very end for Jesus, and to come to Jerusalem for the Passover was an act of highest courage. But not only for him. Hear what I said? Not only for him, but for all who were willing to be associated with him. Hear what I said? You know, it's easy for us to read this story and say, would I have went? And I'm wondering if some of us would have went. Are you proud to be with Jesus? And that's what the story's about. Would you, if you were asked to go to a banquet with Jesus, knowing that he's an outlaw, would you have even thrown the banquet in the first place? And then secondly, shown up to dine with him, knowing the consequences. So this is where we got dining with Jesus, right? Look at that beautiful picture. I typed in John chapter 12, and what came out was that beautiful picture in front of our bulletin. It was a great dining with Jesus. And it's a reflection of being with Jesus. It reminded me of my favorite restaurant in Ventura, the Busy Bee. Just the way it's set up. So dining with Jesus. So here's the story. As one other author stated, going to Jerusalem or going to the Passover to raise Lazarus from the dead in chapters 11 and 12, or chapter 11 in particular, sealed Jesus' fate. His disciples knew it. They warned him, do not go. So the question is, why did Jesus go? Why did he go? Well, we can all say because he went there and he knew his purpose. But it was very simple. He loved Lazarus. And it even says that, the disciple whom you love. When his sister Mary and Martha came to him, is sick, and Jesus wept. He loved them. And he was willing to sacrifice his own life and going to a dangerous place to be with someone he loved. Will you? Or would you? Amen? So that's the story. That's the context behind this little scene. And so, look what it says in chapter 12, verse 1. 6 days before the Passover. Well, what day was that? Had to be a Friday. Friday, then you got Saturday, Sunday, which is Palm Sunday or the triumphal entry. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, the Passover. 6 days. So this gives us a little chronology. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany. And Bethany is basically just a little town outside of Jerusalem. And I was thinking about it. How far is Bethany from the city walls of Jerusalem. And I was thinking the best scenario I can give to you is like if you went up to Hospital Hill at the hospital, and you look from that point and you go all the way across Hospital Hill. I forgot the name of the street that goes across the top. You see the beautiful view of Santa Paula on a donkey all the way down to the very end where you come down and you have to come down and you end up by our church. You could come down and you come out, I guess Bob Russell Street. I forgot the name of his street right there. You come down and you end up going this way towards the cemetery. That's about how far Bethany was from the city walls. Not too far, a couple miles, mile and a half. So 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, and it says where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. And then it says, and this is where I got the idea of dining with Jesus, here a dinner was given in Jesus' honor. Knowing the consequences of associating with Jesus, they did it anyways. Who would do that? And it says very specifically, people who did it. Not only did Jesus love Lazarus, they loved Jesus. So here a dinner was given in Jesus' honor, and the first name mentioned after that, Martha, served, while Lazarus was among those reclining at the table with him. What a great scene. Lazarus was there. Martha's there. It was 6 days before the Passover. And then Martha served while Lazarus was among those reclining at the table with him. And in verse 3, then Mary took about a pint of pure nard, an expensive perfume, and I put in my notes, a perfume worth $66,000. A year's wages, close to a year's wages. A lot of money. She took about a pint of pure nard, an expensive perfume. She poured it on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house, and I couldn't resist this. You invite Jesus to your house, into your heart. Your house will be filled with this beautiful fragrance. Think about that. Your house, it says, the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. What a beautiful scene. He loved Lazarus. He knew the consequences. His fate was going to be filled. It was sealed. Yet these people did it for him anyways. So, just what was at stake of going to Jerusalem sealed Jesus' fate in raising Lazarus from the dead in chapter 11. He knew that was going to happen. He knew this was the time. And it was right before, a week before the Passover, when all this stuff went on. Why would he do this? Why would he go? And it's because obviously he loved them. And they loved him. The sad part is when you read this story and you read the rest of it, we come to church and we're in a safe little environment, right? And sometimes we don't know, and there's no way around this, that they didn't know there was a tattletale within that little inner circled group. Tattletale. And you know who it is. It's clear the way the text says. And they want to make sure that we remember that. Verse 4. And notice the way how they introduce this person. But one of his disciples. One of his own. One of his trusted 12 was there. Judas Iscariot, who was later to betray him, objected. And that's how they introduce him. One of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, who was later to betray him, objected. And here's what he did, what I did. He calculated the cost, I'm sure in his mind, how much this pure nard was, right? Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It was worth more than a year's wages. And that's why I calculated this myself. Then did not say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. As a keeper of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. And sometimes we can look at that and skip over it, but there was a couple words there as you're translating that just stood out to me. You ever heard of the word a kleptomaniac? What is that? Someone who steals things, not realizing you're just taking things, right? That's what I understood it. And the word for a thief is kleptes. It comes from that word. So he used to do that. Maybe not thinking that it was wrong. But even being someone in charge of money in the church was really important. That's why it says you to count it with people and being trusted with something as a fiduciary of the church. That's very important, amen? We have trustees. Amen. This is what was going on here. And Jesus trusted him with the money. He who is entrusted with little is trusted with much, right? So if someone entrusts you with a small thing, then do it with integrity. And Judas, it's clear that they wanted to single that out. He was entrusted with this money bag, and he used to steal from it. They considered him a thief. And it says he used to help himself with what was put in it. And the word for what was put in it, in the money bag, is he pilfered the money. And I didn't understand that word. And then I looked at another, what does pilfered mean? Well, he shoplifted. Very simple. That's what it means, shoplifted. I guess don't steal. Little simple side lesson. It's one of the 10 Commandments, right? Thou shalt not steal. Very simple. Then it says, essentially, you read all this story, and then Jesus steps into the picture. And to me, it's profound what he says. And it's in the second person singular. He's not saying this as a general statement to way to handle the poor and money. He's actually correcting Judas directly. Look what it says. Leave her alone. He's looking at Judas. Leave her alone. And it's easy for me to get cynical. I'm wondering how Jesus said it. Was he saying it in a tone of anger? Was he saying it in a tone of trying to win him over? But he says, leave her alone. Jesus replied, it was intended that she should save this perfume for the day of my burial, which was only a week away. Remember I said Friday? It was Friday before the Passover. 1 week later on that Friday is when he was dying on the cross. Where Joseph of Arimathea went to the tomb and said, we only got 2 hours before the Sabbath ends to take him down from the cross. And to be honest, they didn't even have time to use this perfume for him because they had to wrap him and do it before the Sabbath came. And that's why on Sunday morning they had to go early and to anoint him with these spices. And they never had to do it again. Why? Because he raised from the dead. So this is profound in here. He says, it was intended that she should save this perfume for the day of my burial. You will always have the poor among you, but you will not always have me. So I put 2 little comments. Number 1, his burial was only 6 days away. How prophetic. There's a little story that I was reading in a commentary and saying, today, right now, is the most important time in your life. Because you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Amen. So if you have something to do today, then do it right now. If you have time to dine with Jesus today, then dine with him today. Because you may not get that second chance. And that sounds negative, but Judas didn't care about the second chance here. It was clear. He was more worried about this money situation, and he did not care clearly, to me, I guess indirectly, about Jesus. And here's, I guess, to me, what stood out to me. This story is mentioned verbatim in Matthew, Mark, and in Luke. But in this story, I always wonder why they did this. This story in Matthew's and Luke's, and Mark and in Luke, is the Wednesday before the Passover. In other words, today it says 6 days before the Passover on that Friday, and Saturday they probably threw the meal for him because you can't work on the Sabbath, so it was Saturday evening. And if you look at chapter 12, verse 12, it says the next day was Palm Sunday, you might say. So you see the timing here. But in those other Gospels, it's the day before. And why is that important, the day before? Because in those two Gospels, they highlight the same people doing the same things, except that was the day that Judas snuck away during this feast right after Jesus corrected him and went to the chief priests. You read those. You don't have to read them right now, but in Mark, I think it's in Mark chapter 14, verse 10 and following, or 1 through 10. You could read in Matthew chapter 26, 1 through 12 in there. That was that day when Jesus corrected Judas is when he left. And I don't know if he left because he was antagonized, because Jesus corrected him, but John's pretty clear why he left. You back up in chapter 6. It says, "Then Jesus replied, 'Have I not chosen you, 12? Yet one of you is a devil.' And he meant Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, who, though one of the 12, was later to betray him." And then in chapter 13, when they did do the Passover feast, in verse 27, it says, "As soon as Judas took bread, Satan entered him." And then if you look back in verse 2 of the same chapter, it says that the evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. So this was all going on. And I want you to think of the people that are there. The writers 60 years later are talking about all these little stuff that are going on behind the scenes, and Jesus had to know all this. But the other people that were there that loved him didn't. It was only after the fact that they realized all this stuff was going on. So you have Mary, who did a loving, beautiful thing. You had Judas, who was either already later to betray him, or in the other Gospels, he snuck out in this scene, went over to the chief priests, and then it says he looked for an opportune time to betray Jesus. And then you have Jesus saying, "Leave her alone." And then now you have one more group of people. And this is how the story ends. It's the crowd. The crowd does this. "Meanwhile, a large crowd of the Jews found out that Jesus was there and came." So these had to be the ones that were on his side, because they had to be the ones in chapter 11 that probably witnessed Lazarus being raised from the dead, and they were excited. They had to have witnessed it, because it says a large crowd came. There were some of them, yes, that told the Pharisees, but there was other group that came because they wanted to be with Jesus too. It seemed like an open banquet, or church potluck of some time, where everyone wanted to be with Jesus. So meanwhile, a large crowd of Jews found out that Jesus was there and came, not only because of him, but also to see Lazarus. Interesting. Lazarus is mentioned 5 times in this story. In 12 verses, 5 times. One in a pronoun, but the other time his name is mentioned over and over and over again. So the chief priests, verse 10, made plans to kill Lazarus as well, for on account of him, many of the Jews, and I love the way this is worded. It says in my version, we're going over, right? We're going over to Jesus. Another way of saying it, another way of wording it is going away to Jesus. So they were going away from their former lifestyle in Judaism and converting over to Jesus. That's what the wording is here. They were converting because of Lazarus and the scene. And then that's how the story ends. For on account of him, many Jews were going over to Jesus and believing. And if you skip down to the end of what you call Palm Sunday, verse 19, so the Pharisees said to one another, "See, the whole world, this is getting us nowhere. Look how the whole world has gone after him." And if it wasn't for, anyways, that's the story. That's today's story. I don't want to give too much. So I guess my question to you is, If Jesus would have invited you to the dinner, would you have gone? And would you have thrown a banquet for him? So my challenge to you is, and this is the way I think, we're coming up in Easter season, and Jesus is the reason for the season. I was in Denny's the other day, and there's a waiter there that I know, I was a former student of mine, and he asked me, he goes, "Bob, do you still preach at that church across the street from the cemetery?" He goes, "Yeah." He goes, "Every time I go by your church, it looks like it's closed." That's what he told me. It looks like it's closed. It's probably because it's the side of a building, right? Even Liz told me one time the firefighters or someone, the police officers, wanted to use our building because they said it doesn't look like a church. It's kind of funny, right? So I want to challenge you. Liz and I made these flyers. Next week I'm going to preach on, I guess, the triumphal entry, Palm Sunday. And then the week after that, a bilingual service on the resurrection. How are we going to make our church alive and not look like it's closed? Well, we are the evangelists. Dine with Jesus. Just invite them to dine with us with Jesus. Amen. I can do my part, but I want to challenge you to take these, think of someone that you know, and just give them a flyer. And challenge them. Would you come on Easter? And I remember just one last thing to encourage you. It must have been 4 or 5 Easters ago. Me and Mike were out there. We had coffee set up. We had our little easy up. And this man came out in a pickup truck, and he stopped. He goes, "What are you doing out here?" I go, "Well, it's Easter Sunday, and we're trying to invite people to church." And I never forgot this. He never came back again, but he said that day, he goes, "I'll be right back." He went home, came back in a suit and tie, and went to church. That easy. I didn't see him again. But he at least came on Easter Sunday. So you know what? Our job is to plant, and God's job is to increase, right? So be encouraged. Go and invite Jesus and come on Easter Sunday and next week too. Amen. God bless you. And if you want to come to Jesus, like we always share, there's an invitation for you to give your heart to Jesus and convert over to him like many of the Jews who went to see this, right? So God bless you as we stand and sing song number 778.